The mistake. The photograph showed Marcus Hayes's 9-year-old daughter standing in front of the chemical plant the day before she died, and according to the date stamp, the company had known about the contamination for 6 months before the accident that killed 23 children in 1986. Wait, before the next revelation happens. If this mystery has already captivated you, tell us where you're watching from. And to make sure you don't miss any unexpected alliances or life-changing discoveries, subscribe and join our circle. The game is about to change. Now, back to the scene. Marcus stared at the photograph in his trembling hands, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst. Around him, the storage unit stretched into shadow, boxes and furniture and the accumulated debris of a life he'd purchased for $300 at an auction in Newark, New Jersey. He'd been looking for antiques to resell, maybe some vintage tools or old furniture he could flip for profit. Instead, he'd found his daughter, Sarah, 9 years old, gap-toothed smile, pigtails, wearing her favorite purple jacket, standing in front of the Apex Chemical Plant's main entrance with a group of other children, all of them holding signs that read, "School Field Trip, Apex Chemicals, April 15, 1986. April 15, 1986, the day before the explosion. Marcus had been 28 years old when his daughter died. He was 56 now, and he'd spent every single one of those 28 years believing it was an accident, a terrible, tragic accident that no one could have prevented. But the document clipped to the photograph told a different story. It was a memo printed on Apex Chemical letterhead dated October 8, 1985, 6 months before the explosion. The subject line read, "Urgent, Safety Protocol Violations, Tank 7 Pressure System." Marcus forced himself to read through the technical language, his engineering background helping him decode what it meant. Tank 7's pressure relief system was faulty. The backup systems were inadequate. The automatic shutdown protocols were offline. And the estimated timeline for catastrophic failure was 4 to 8 months without intervention. The memo recommended immediate shutdown and repair. It was signed by someone named Dr. Eleanor Hartley, senior chemical engineer. And at the bottom, in handwriting, were 3 words that made Marcus's blood run cold: rejected, cost prohibitive. That signature belonged to James Whitmore, VP of Operations. Marcus sat down heavily on an old trunk, his legs suddenly unable to support him. For 28 years, he'd been told that the explosion was unforeseeable, an unfortunate mechanical failure, a freak accident. The company had expressed its condolences, paid out modest settlements to the families, and continued operating. 23 children had died that day. 23 kids on a school field trip taken to the chemical plant as part of an educational program to show them how industry worked. They'd been standing in the visitor center when Tank 7 exploded, sending a cloud of toxic chemicals through the ventilation system. Sarah had been among them. And now, holding this memo in his hands, Marcus understood. It hadn't been an accident at all. It had been negligence. It had been a choice to save money instead of lives. His phone rang, jarring him back to the present. It was his wife, Diane. "Hey, honey," she said. "How's the storage unit? Find anything good?" Marcus looked at the photograph of their daughter, at the memo that proved her death had been preventable, at the boxes surrounding him that clearly contained more evidence. "Diane," he said, his voice cracking, "I need you to come here, right now. I found something about Sarah." The silence on the other end was absolute. "What do you mean?" "Just come, please. I can't explain over the phone." He gave her the address and hung up, then sat staring at the photograph. Sarah's smile looked back at him, frozen in time, forever 9 years old. Around him, the storage unit seemed to close in. He forced himself to stand, to start looking through the other boxes with shaking hands. If this photograph and memo were here, what else had been hidden? The first box contained more photographs, dozens of them. Apex Chemicals facilities, dated from 1980 to 1990. Notes in the margins highlighting safety violations, rusted pipes, cracked containment vessels, workers without proper protective equipment. The second box was full of documents, inspection reports that had been altered, safety violations that had been covered up, memos detailing management's awareness of dozens of hazards, including Tank 7. The third box contained personal items, a woman's reading glasses, a journal, a framed photograph of an elderly couple, the couple whose storage unit this must have been. Marcus opened the journal with trembling hands. The first entry was dated January 3, 2023, less than 2 years ago. "My name is Eleanor Hartley," it began. "I am 81 years old, and I am dying. The cancer that started in my lungs, the same lungs that breathed in Apex Chemicals' toxic air for 20 years, has metastasized. I have perhaps 6 months left. I am writing this because I can no longer carry the weight of what I know, what I helped hide, what I was complicit in. I was the senior chemical engineer at Apex Chemicals from 1978 to 1996. I wrote the memo warning about Tank 7. I recommended immediate shutdown. And when my superiors rejected my recommendation, I did not quit. I did not go to the authorities. I did not fight. I told myself I had a family to support. I told myself one person couldn't change a corrupt system. I told myself I'd done my part by writing the memo, and what happened after that wasn't my responsibility. 23 children died because of my cowardice. Their blood is on my hands as surely as if I'd triggered the explosion myself. This storage unit contains all the evidence I've been collecting for the past 40 years. Documents that Apex destroyed or claimed never existed. Photographs that prove they knew about countless safety violations. Testimony from workers who were silenced with settlements and NDAs. I could never bring myself to come forward while I was alive. I was too afraid of lawsuits, of prison, of shame. But I can't take this guilt to my grave. Someone needs to know the truth. Someone needs to hold them accountable. If you're reading this, then I'm dead, and this storage unit has presumably been sold or cleared out. I'm sorry to burden you with this knowledge, but please, please don't let these children's deaths be for nothing. Tell their story. Expose what happened. Make sure Apex Chemical finally pays for what they did. I was a coward in life. Let me at least be brave in death." The ending ended there. Marcus read it 3 times, tears streaming down his face. Eleanor Hartley, the name on the memo. She'd known. She'd tried to warn them. And then she'd spent 40 years drowning in guilt. He heard a car pulling up outside, then footsteps. Diane appeared in the doorway of the storage unit, her face pale with worry. "Marcus, what?" He held up the photograph. Diane's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God, is that—" "Sarah, the day before she died." He handed her the memo. "Read this." He watched his wife's face as she read, saw the same progression of emotions he'd experienced. Confusion, understanding, horror, rage. "They knew," she whispered. "They knew and they didn't fix it." "There's more." Marcus gestured to the boxes around them. "This whole unit is full of evidence." The woman who owned it, Eleanor Hartley, she was the engineer who tried to warn them. She's been collecting proof for 40 years. Diane sank onto the trunk beside him, still holding the memo. Where is she now? Dead, I think. According to her journal, she had cancer. This storage unit was supposed to be her confession. They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of the discovery settling over them. "What do we do?" Diane asked finally. Marcus looked at the photograph of Sarah one more time, at her innocent smile, at the purple jacket she'd been wearing when they'd identified her body 28 years ago. "We finish what Eleanor Hartley started," he said. "We expose everything. We make sure everyone knows that Sarah and those other kids died because a corporation chose profit over safety, and we make damn sure Apex Chemical pays for it." Diane took his hand, squeezing tight. "It's going to be hard. They're a huge company. They'll have lawyers, resources." "I don't care," Marcus interrupted. "Our daughter deserves justice. Those other kids deserve justice. And Eleanor Hartley deserves to have her confession heard." He stood, his resolve hardening. "Let's start going through everything. We need to document all of this, make copies, secure it somewhere safe. If this evidence has been hidden for 40 years, we're not going to let it disappear now." As they began the work of cataloging the contents of the storage unit, neither of them noticed the car that pulled up down the street, or the man inside taking photographs of them. Some secrets didn't want to stay buried, and some people would do anything to keep them that way. The storage unit had been auctioned by mistake. That was what Marcus and Diane learned 3 days later when an elderly man showed up at their house, furious and desperate. "That unit wasn't supposed to be sold," Howard Hartley said, standing on their porch in the rain. He was in his 80s, stooped and thin, but his eyes burned with intensity. "My wife died 6 weeks ago. The storage fees were supposed to be paid from our estate, but there was some kind of administrative error. By the time I realized what had happened, the unit had already been auctioned." Marcus and Diane exchanged glances. They'd spent 3 days going through the storage unit's contents, photographing everything, making copies, and storing the originals in a safe deposit box. They'd also reached out to a lawyer, a public interest attorney named Rebecca Martinez, who specialized in corporate accountability cases. "Mr. Hartley," Diane said gently, "I think you should come inside." They sat in the living room, rain pattering against the windows. Howard Hartley looked around at their modest home, the worn furniture, the photographs of Sarah that still lined the walls, the shrine in the corner that Diane had maintained for 28 years. "You lost someone," he said quietly. "Our daughter," Marcus replied, "in the Apex Chemical explosion, April 16, 1986. Howard's face crumpled. Oh, God, I'm so sorry." "Your wife wrote about it," Diane said. She handed him a copy of Eleanor's journal entry. "We found this in the storage unit, along with everything else." Howard read his wife's words, tears streaming down his weathered face. When he finished, he just sat there, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I didn't know," he said finally. "Eleanor never told me. She never told anyone. She carried it all alone for 40 years. "Why?" Marcus asked. "Why didn't she come forward?" Howard wiped his eyes, his hands trembling. "Eleanor was brilliant, absolutely brilliant, but she grew up poor, fought her way through engineering school when women weren't welcome in the field. When she got the job at Apex, it was everything she'd worked for. Good salary, respect, a chance to do meaningful work." He paused, gathering himself. "After the explosion, she changed. Became withdrawn, started drinking. I thought it was just stress from the job. She said the company was going through a hard time after the accident. But she never told me it was guilt." "When did you find out?" Diane asked. 2 weeks before she died. The cancer had spread to her brain, and she was on heavy pain medication. She started talking about children, about a memo, about blood on her hands. I thought it was delirium." Howard's voice broke. "Then she told me about the storage unit. Made me promise I'd keep paying the rent. Said it was important, that someday someone would need what was inside." "But you didn't know what was in it?" "She said it was her research, her personal papers. I assumed it was technical documents, maybe patents or something she wanted preserved. I didn't know. He looked at them with haunted eyes. I didn't know she'd been carrying evidence of a cover-up for 4 decades. Marcus leaned forward. Mr. Hartley, your wife's evidence could finally bring Apex Chemical to justice. We have a lawyer who thinks we can build a case. Wrongful death, negligence, conspiracy to suppress evidence. But we need your help. We need you to testify about your wife's state of mind, her intentions. We need you to confirm this was her confession. Howard was quiet for a long moment. Then, will it bring those children back? No, Diane said softly, but it might give their families closure, and it might prevent the company from hurting anyone else. Eleanor wanted that, Howard said. More than anything, she wanted to prevent it from happening again. That's what she said at the end, that she couldn't save the children who died, but maybe she could save the ones who hadn't been born yet. He looked at Marcus and Diane with sudden intensity. I'll help. Whatever you need, I'll do it. It's what Eleanor would have wanted. It's what she should have done 40 years ago. They spent the next hour going through the evidence with Howard, who provided context his wife hadn't included. He told them about her nightmares, her drinking, the days she couldn't get out of bed. He told them about the mystery payments she'd made over the years, donations to children's hospitals, scholarships for engineering students, money sent anonymously to the families of the explosion victims. She was trying to make up for it, Howard said, trying to atone without actually facing what she'd done. It destroyed her. The guilt destroyed her more surely than the cancer did. As Howard was leaving, he paused at the door. There's something else you should know. Apex Chemical still operates. They changed their name in 1998 to Meridian Industries. They're still producing chemicals, still cutting corners. I know because Eleanor kept tabs on them until she couldn't anymore. There have been incidents, spills, worker injuries, violations. Nothing as catastrophic as 1986, but the same patterns, the same choices. Marcus felt cold. They're still operating? Under a different name, different management, but some of the same board members, some of the same executives, including James Whitmore, the man who rejected Eleanor's recommendation. He's the CEO now. After Howard left, Marcus and Diane sat in silence. We have to do this, Diane said finally. Not just for Sarah, for everyone they might hurt next. Marcus nodded. Tomorrow, we go to the lawyer with everything. We tell the whole story, Eleanor's confession, the evidence, Howard's testimony. We see if there's enough to build a case. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He got up at 2 a.m. and went to Sarah's room, kept exactly as it had been the day she died, a shrine to a life cut short. He sat on her bed and looked at the posters on the walls, the stuffed animals on the shelf, the science fair trophy she'd won 2 months before the explosion. We're going to get them, baby girl, he whispered. We're going to make sure everyone knows what they did to you, to all of you. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Stop digging. Some things are better left buried. This is your only warning. Marcus stared at the message, his heart racing. Someone was watching them. Someone knew what they'd found. He forwarded the message to Rebecca Martinez, their lawyer, then went to check all the locks on the doors and windows. The fight, he realized, was just beginning. Rebecca Martinez's office was in a converted brownstone in Brooklyn, cluttered with case files and law books and the organized chaos of a crusader who'd never met a lost cause she didn't want to take on. She was 42, with sharp eyes and gray-streaked hair pulled back in a bun. She'd spent 15 years taking on corporate defendants, and the wins on her walls, framed newspaper articles about settlements and convictions, showed she was good at it. This is extraordinary, she said after reviewing the evidence. She'd spent 3 hours going through everything Marcus and Diane had brought, the photographs, the memos, Eleanor's journal, Howard's testimony. I've never seen anything quite like this. A whistleblower's confession delivered 40 years after the fact, with full documentation. Can we build a case? Marcus asked. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled. The legal challenges are significant. Statute of limitations is a big one. Normally, you have a limited time to file wrongful death claims. But there are exceptions for fraud and intentional concealment. If we can prove Apex deliberately hid evidence, the clock doesn't start until the fraud is discovered. Which was 3 days ago, Diane said. Exactly. We'd be arguing that you couldn't have known about the negligence because the company actively covered it up. Eleanor's testimony, her journal, her collected evidence, supports that. The question is whether a judge will let the case proceed. And if they do, Marcus asked, then we have a strong case. Documented safety violations, internal memos showing corporate knowledge, evidence of a cover-up. We'd be going after them for wrongful death, negligence, fraud, and conspiracy. Rebecca's expression was grim. But I need to be honest with you. Meridian Industries, that's what Apex became, is a billion-dollar company with unlimited legal resources. They will fight this with everything they have. Let them, Marcus said. We have the truth. The truth isn't always enough in court, Rebecca warned. And there's another issue. That threatening text you received, that's just the beginning. These companies don't play fair. They'll investigate you, try to find anything they can use to discredit you. They'll drag your lives through the mud. They'll make this as painful as possible, hoping you'll give up. Diane reached for Marcus's hand. We're not giving up. Good, because we'll need to file motions, probably deal with years of litigation, and face a media circus. The families of the other victims will need to be contacted. They have a right to know about this evidence, and they'll likely want to join the suit as co-plaintiffs. Marcus felt a weight settling on his shoulders. How do we find them? I have investigators who can track them down. It's been 28 years, so some of them may have moved, some may have passed away, but we'll find as many as we can. Rebecca pulled out a legal pad. Let's start with what we know. The explosion killed 23 children. Do you remember any of the other families? Marcus and Diane exchanged glances. They'd been so consumed by their own grief that they'd barely registered the other families at the time. There was a memorial service, Diane said slowly. All the families were there. I remember some names. Jennifer Price, Tommy Rodriguez, the Wu twins. I can't remember their first names. That's a start. I'll have my team begin tracking them down. Rebecca made notes. In the meantime, we need to secure all the physical evidence. You said you have it in a safe deposit box? The originals, yes. We made copies of everything. Good. Make more copies. Store them in multiple locations. I'm not trying to make you paranoid, but evidence has a way of disappearing in cases like this. Over the next 2 weeks, Rebecca's team worked to identify and locate the families of the other victims. It was harder than expected. 28 years was a long time, and people had scattered. Some had died. Some had remarried and changed names. Some had moved across the country, trying to escape the memories. But slowly, they found them. Marcus and Diane volunteered to make the initial contacts. It felt wrong to have a stranger call with this information. These people deserved to hear it from someone who'd walked the same path. The first call was to Michael Price, whose daughter Jennifer had been one of Sarah's best friends. Marcus? Michael's voice was confused when he answered. Marcus Hayes? Is that really you? Hi, Michael. I know this is out of the blue, but I need to talk to you about Jennifer, about the explosion. The silence was heavy. Then, why? Why now, after all these years? Marcus took a deep breath and told him everything. The storage unit, Eleanor Hartley's confession, the evidence they'd found. He heard Michael's breathing change, heard the moment understanding hit. You're telling me it wasn't an accident? Michael said, his voice hollow. You're telling me they knew and they let our kids die anyway? Yes, and we're filing a lawsuit. Rebecca Martinez, she's our attorney. She says if we can prove the cover-up, we might have a case. But we need the other families. We need everyone together on this. Another long silence. Then, I'm in. Whatever you need, I'm in. Jennifer deserves justice. The calls continued. Some families were angry. Not at Marcus, but at the situation, at the lost years, at the fact that they'd spent nearly 3 decades believing a lie. Some were skeptical, worried it was a scam or a cruel hoax. Some were grateful just to be acknowledged, to have someone say that their child's death mattered. By the end of 2 weeks, they'd located 17 of the 23 families. 3 families couldn't be found. 2 had passed away. One, the Rodriguez family, had moved to Puerto Rico and didn't respond to messages. But 17 families was enough. Rebecca called a meeting at a community center in Newark, close to where the old Apex facility had stood. The turnout was better than expected. 29 people, representing 17 children who died in 1986. Marcus stood at the front of the room with Diane, looking at these faces marked by grief and time. He saw himself reflected in their eyes, the same loss, the same lingering questions, the same need for meaning in senseless tragedy. "Thank you," he began. "I know this is difficult. I know opening old wounds is the last thing any of us wants. But I found something that I think you all deserve to know about." He told them the story, the accidental storage unit auction, Eleanor Hartley's confession, the evidence that proved their children's deaths had been preventable. The room was absolutely silent as he spoke. When he finished, Rebecca took over, explaining the legal case they wanted to build. She was honest about the challenges, about the likelihood of a long fight, about the fact that winning wasn't guaranteed. But, she concluded, if we don't try, then Apex, Meridian Industries gets away with it. They get to pretend it was just an unfortunate accident, and they get to keep operating, keep cutting corners, keep putting profit over people. Your children died because of their negligence. Don't they deserve to have the truth told? A woman in the back stood up. Marcus recognized her. She was older now, her hair white, but he remembered her from the memorial service, Lisa Chen, mother of the Wu twins. "I've spent 28 years trying to forgive," she said, her voice shaking, "trying to accept that it was God's will, that these things just happen. And now you're telling me it wasn't God? It was greed." She looked around the room. "I want in. I want to fight. Even if we lose, even if it takes years, I want them to know we didn't forget. Our children didn't disappear into history. They mattered." One by one, the others stood. Michael Price, Carol Winters, David Kim. Names Marcus barely remembered from 28 years ago, united again by loss. By the end of the meeting, all 17 families had agreed to join the lawsuit. As people filed out, many of them stopped to thank Marcus and Diane. Some hugged them, some just stood there, tears streaming down their faces, unable to speak. Howard Hartley had come to the meeting too, sitting quietly in the corner. As he was leaving, he approached Marcus. "Eleanor would have been proud," he said, "terrified but proud. This is what she wanted, for someone to care enough to fight." "I'm sorry she had to live with that guilt for so long," Marcus said. "She made her choice. We all do." Howard looked at the departing families. But at least now something good might come from it. At least she didn't collect all that evidence for nothing. After everyone left, Rebecca pulled Marcus and Diane aside. "I have to tell you something. I did some preliminary research into Meridian Industries, the company that used to be Apex Chemical. They're not just still operating, they're thriving. Billion-dollar contracts with the government, facilities in 12 states. And James Whitmore, the VP who rejected Eleanor's memo, he's the CEO, like Howard said, worth about $50 million personally. Marcus felt rage building in his chest. He got rich while our kids stayed dead. Yes. And he's going to fight like hell to keep that money and reputation intact. Rebecca's expression was grim. I filed the initial complaint this morning. As of now, we're officially suing Meridian Industries for wrongful death, negligence, fraud, and conspiracy. The moment it hits the news, all hell is going to break loose. Let it, Diane said firmly. We're ready. They weren't ready. Nothing could have prepared them for what came next. The story broke in the Newark Star-Ledger 2 days after Rebecca filed the lawsuit. Families sue chemical company over 1986 disaster, claim evidence of cover-up hidden for decades. By that evening, it had gone national. Marcus's phone started ringing at 6 a.m. Reporters wanting interviews, TV producers wanting him on morning shows, documentarians wanting to film the storage unit. He and Diane stopped answering after the 50th call. But the media attention also brought something else. More witnesses. Former Apex employees started coming forward, people who'd worked at the facility in the 1980s and had their own stories of safety violations and intimidation. A former security guard who'd been told to escort OSHA inspectors away from certain areas. A secretary who'd seen documents being shredded the week after the explosion. A maintenance worker who'd been fired for reporting a chemical leak. "This is good," Rebecca told them in a conference call. "Each of these witnesses strengthens our case. It shows a pattern of negligence and cover-up." But Meridian Industries wasn't taking the lawsuit quietly. Their response came swift and brutal. Within a week, they'd filed motions to dismiss based on statute of limitations. They'd issued a public statement expressing sympathy for the families while denying any wrongdoing. And they'd hired a team of attorneys from one of the country's most prestigious law firms. Then came the character assassination. An article appeared in a business journal questioning Eleanor Hartley's credibility. It suggested she'd been fired from Apex for incompetence, that her evidence was the revenge fantasy of a disgruntled former employee. The article failed to mention that Eleanor had worked at Apex for 18 years and had left voluntarily. Then they went after Marcus. Private investigators dug into his background. They found the DUI from 15 years ago, the credit card debt, the fact that he'd filed for bankruptcy after Diane's medical bills. A sympathetic hit piece appeared online. Plaintiffs in chemical company lawsuit have history of financial problems. Is this about justice or money? Marcus wanted to punch something. They're trying to make us look like we're doing this for a payday. Of course they are, Rebecca said. It's textbook corporate defense. Discredit the plaintiffs, muddy the waters, make the jury think you're just after money. We expected this. It doesn't make it hurt less, Diane said quietly. The media circus intensified. Every day brought new developments, new revelations, new attacks. Meridian CEO James Whitmore gave an interview calling the lawsuit a tragic attempt to exploit a decades-old accident for financial gain. Marcus watched the interview with mounting fury. Whitmore was 74 now, distinguished-looking in an expensive suit, every inch the respectable businessman. The explosion in 1986 was a terrible tragedy, Whitmore said, his expression grave. We've never denied that, but it was an accident, a malfunction that no one could have foreseen. The suggestion that we knowingly put children in danger is not only false, it's offensive. But there are documents, the interviewer pressed, memos warning about safety issues. Taken out of context by people who weren't engineers, who don't understand industrial processes, Whitmore said smoothly. Every facility has routine maintenance issues. That doesn't mean catastrophic failure is imminent. We followed all regulations, all safety protocols. The idea that we would deliberately endanger children is absurd. Marcus turned off the TV before he threw something at it. His lying, he said to Diane. His lying, and he knows we know his lying. and he doesn't care because he thinks he'll get away with it. Then we prove his lying, Diane said. We take all of Eleanor's evidence, all these witness testimonies, and we prove it in court. But getting to court proved harder than expected. Meridian's lawyers filed motion after motion to dismiss the case, to move it to a different jurisdiction, to exclude certain evidence, to depose every plaintiff extensively. Each motion required a response, a hearing, legal arguments that ate up time and money. This is a war of attrition, Rebecca explained 6 months into the process. They have unlimited resources. They can afford to drag this out for years, hoping we'll run out of money or patience or will. It's how they win most of these cases, not in court, but by exhausting the opposition. Are we running out of money? Marcus asked. I'm working pro bono, and my investigators are doing the same, but there are filing fees, expert witnesses, depositions. Costs add up. We've started a legal fund, and some of the families are contributing what they can. But yes, money is tight. The stress was taking its toll. Marcus had trouble sleeping. Diane started getting migraines. Some of the other plaintiff families were having second thoughts, worried about the public exposure and the legal costs. Then, 8 months after filing the lawsuit, they got their first major win. The judge denied Meridian's motion to dismiss based on statute of limitations, ruling that there was sufficient evidence of intentional concealment to warrant letting the case proceed. This is huge, Rebecca said, grinning for the first time in months. We're going to trial. They can't kill this with motions. We're actually going to get our day in court. But 2 days later, Marcus received another threatening message. This time, it wasn't a text. It was a brick through his living room window at 2 a.m. with a note tied to it. Drop the lawsuit, or next time, it won't be a window. Marcus called the police, filed a report. The officer who took the statement was sympathetic but not hopeful. Probably just some nut job who read about the case, the officer said, but we'll keep an eye on your place. Rebecca was less dismissive. This is intimidation, and it means they're worried. People don't threaten witnesses in cases they think they'll win. They threaten witnesses when they're scared. Should we be scared? Diane asked. Yes, Rebecca said bluntly, but don't let fear stop you. That's what they want. Marcus upgraded their home security system and started checking over his shoulder whenever he left the house. But he didn't drop the lawsuit. None of them did. The trial was set to begin in September, 18 months after Marcus had first opened that storage unit. In the months leading up to it, Rebecca and her team worked around the clock preparing. They interviewed witnesses, consulted with engineering experts, built timelines and diagrams showing exactly what Apex Chemical had known and when they'd known it. Meridian's legal team was equally busy. They brought in their own experts to testify that the explosion was unforeseeable. They prepared character witnesses to vouch for James Whitmore's integrity. They created elaborate presentations showing all the safety protocols the company had supposedly followed. The trial would be held in Newark, in the same courthouse where the original investigation into the explosion had been quietly buried in 1986. On the first day of jury selection, Marcus and Diane sat in the courtroom with the other plaintiff families. Across the aisle sat the Meridian legal team, 8 lawyers in expensive suits, radiating confidence and money. James Whitmore was there too, looking somber and distinguished, the picture of a man being unfairly accused. The jury selection took 3 days. Rebecca wanted people who would understand corporate negligence, who wouldn't be dazzled by Meridian's money and prestige. Meridian's lawyers wanted business owners, people who would be sympathetic to the challenges of running a company. Finally, they had 12 jurors and 2 alternates. The trial could begin. Rebecca's opening statement was devastating. She started by putting up a photograph on a large screen, the same photograph Marcus had found in the storage unit, showing Sarah and the other children in front of Apex Chemical. These are the faces of 23 children who went on a field trip in April 1986, she said. They were excited. They were curious about science and industry. They trusted that the adults in charge would keep them safe. She clicked to the next image, the Apex facility after the explosion, smoke billowing into the sky. That trust was misplaced, not because of an unforeseeable accident, but because of a deliberate choice. A choice to ignore safety warnings, a choice to put profit over people, a choice to let children die rather than spend money on repairs. She walked the jury through the evidence methodically. The memo warning about Tank 7, the rejection of that warning, the 6 months between the warning and the explosion, 6 months when repairs could have been made, lives could have been saved. The company will tell you this was just routine maintenance, that no one could have predicted the explosion. But Eleanor Hartley predicted it. She laid out exactly what would happen if the tank wasn't repaired, and she was right. Rebecca's voice rose with passion. For 40 years, the families of these children were told it was an accident, a terrible, unavoidable tragedy. They carried that grief, believing that nothing could have prevented it. But it wasn't an accident. It was negligence. It was greed. It was a choice. She returned to the photograph of the children. Sarah Hayes, Jennifer Price, Tommy Rodriguez, the Wu twins, Michael and Michelle. 23 names, 23 futures stolen, 23 families destroyed, not by fate, not by God, but by the defendant's decision that their lives were worth less than the cost of repairs. When she sat down, the courtroom was silent. Meriden's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Jonathan Pierce, stood for their opening statement. He was everything Marcus expected, polished, confident, dismissive. "This is a tragedy being exploited for financial gain," Pierce said bluntly. "These families suffered a terrible loss in 1986. No one disputes that. But suffering a loss doesn't entitle you to fabricate a conspiracy." He walked to the jury box, making eye contact with each juror. Eleanor Hartley was a disgruntled employee with mental health issues who spent decades collecting documents and creating a narrative to justify her own failures. Every industrial facility has routine maintenance concerns. Every facility has equipment that needs monitoring. That doesn't mean the company was negligent. Pierce pulled up Meriden's timeline, showing all the inspections, all the safety checks, all the protocols they'd followed. The explosion was caused by a rare combination of factors. A pressure buildup that happened faster than anyone could have predicted, combined the mechanical failure in a backup system. It was investigated thoroughly in 1986. OSHA found no wrongdoing. The state found no wrongdoing. Insurance investigators found no wrongdoing. He paused for effect. And now, 38 years later, these plaintiffs want you to believe that everyone was wrong, that only Eleanor Hartley, a woman who spent her final years in a paranoid fog of guilt and medication, saw the truth. Is that likely? Or is this exactly what it appears to be? People trying to turn a tragedy into a payday. Marcus wanted to stand up and scream, but Rebecca had warned him this would happen. They had to let the lawyers fight this battle. The trial continued for 6 weeks. Rebecca called witnesses methodically, building her case piece by piece. Former Apex employees testified about safety violations. Engineering experts explained how the explosion could have been prevented. Howard Hartley testified about his wife's guilt and her lifetime of secret documentation. And Marcus testified. Sitting in the witness box, looking at the jury, he told them about Sarah, about her love of science, her curiosity, her excitement about the field trip, about identifying her body, about 28 years of believing it was just a senseless accident. "When I found that photograph," he said, his voice breaking. "When I found the memo showing they'd known for 6 months that this could happen, it was like losing her all over again. Because I realized she didn't have to die. None of them had to die. They died because someone looked at a piece of paper and decided money was more important than children." Pierce's cross-examination was brutal. He questioned Marcus's memory, suggested his grief had made him irrational, implied he'd been financially motivated to join the lawsuit. "Isn't it true you filed for bankruptcy in 2009? Pierce asked. "Yes, after my wife's cancer treatment." "And isn't it true you have significant debts?" "Yes." "So this lawsuit, if successful, would solve your financial problems?" Marcus met his eyes. "My daughter is dead. No amount of money solves that problem." But the damage was done. Pierce had planted the seed. Maybe this was about money after all. Meridian's defense was equally systematic. They brought in their own experts who testified that the explosion was unforeseeable. They showed all their safety protocols, all their inspections, all the ways they'd supposedly exceeded industry standards. And they attacked Eleanor Hartley's credibility mercilessly, painting her as mentally unstable, her evidence as unreliable. James Whitmore testified for 2 days. He was composed, sympathetic, convincing. He expressed deep regret for the explosion while maintaining it was unpreventable. He claimed no memory of Eleanor Huntley's memo, suggesting it might have never reached his desk or might have been addressed in ways the records didn't capture. "I've lived with the grief of that day for 38 years, he said, looking directly at the jury. "Every one of those children weighs on my conscience. If there was anything we could have done to prevent that tragedy, we would have done it. But we can't rewrite history based on one person's paranoid collecting." Rebecca's cross-examination was fierce. "Mr. Whitmore, this is your signature on the memo, correct?" She held up a blown-up image of Eleanor's memo. "It appears to be yes. And these are your handwritten words, rejected, cost prohibitive?" "That appears to be my handwriting, but—" "So you did receive the memo. You did read the warnings, and you did reject the repairs because they were too expensive." "That's a gross oversimplification." "Is it? The memo says Tank 7 needs immediate repairs. You wrote rejected on it. Tank 7 exploded 6 months later. What am I oversimplifying?" Pierce objected. The judge sustained it, but the point was made. The trial stretched on. Expert witnesses debated engineering standards, lawyers argued about what documents meant, what should have been done, what could have been foreseen. And the families sat in the courtroom every day, a silent testament to the stakes. Finally, after 6 weeks of testimony, both sides rested. The judge gave instructions to the jury, and the wait began. Jury deliberations in cases like this could take days or weeks. The jurors had to sort through thousands of pages of documents, dozens of witnesses, conflicting expert testimony. Marcus and Diane waited at home, unable to focus on anything else. The other families were equally anxious, texting updates and support to each other constantly. 3 days into deliberations, the jury sent out a question. "Can we award punitive damages if we find for the plaintiffs?" "That's good," Rebecca said. "It means they're thinking about liability. They're past the question of whether Meridian is responsible. They're talking about how much to award." But 2 days later, another question. "What if we can't reach a unanimous verdict?" "That's not good," Rebecca said. "That suggests there's disagreement, maybe 1 or 2 holdouts." On the 6th day of deliberations, the jury sent a note. They had reached a verdict. Marcus and Diane rushed to the courthouse. So did all the other families. The courtroom was packed. Families on one side, Meridian executives on the other, press in the gallery. The jury filed in, their faces unreadable. The judge asked the foreperson if they'd reached a verdict. "We have, Your Honor." In the matter of Hayes et al. Versus Meridian Industries, on the charge of wrongful death through negligence, how do you find? The foreperson, a middle-aged woman who'd been an elementary school teacher, looked at the families. We find for the plaintiffs. The courtroom erupted, crying, gasping, people hugging. The judge banged his gavel for order. On the charge of fraud and intentional concealment of evidence, we find for the plaintiffs. More chaos. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face, felt Diane gripping his hand so tightly it hurt. And have you determined damages? We have. We award compensatory damages in the amount of $23 million, $1 million per victim. And we award punitive damages in the amount of $50 million, $73 million. It wouldn't bring the children back. It wouldn't undo 28 years of grief. But it was acknowledgement. It was justice. It was the world saying these children mattered. This company was wrong, and there are consequences for choosing profit over people. As the judge dismissed the jury and set a date for post-trial motions, Marcus looked across the aisle at James Whitmore. The CEO's face was pale, his expensive composure cracking. Their eyes met. Marcus mouthed 2 words, "For Sarah." Whitmore looked away. The aftermath of the trial was a whirlwind. Meridian immediately announced they would appeal, but the damage was done. The verdict made international news. Investigative journalists started digging into the company's other facilities, finding similar patterns of safety violations and cover-ups. Federal regulators opened investigations. Criminal prosecutors started looking into possible charges. James Whitmore resigned as CEO within a week, citing health concerns. Several other executives followed. The families split the compensatory damages, approximately $1.35 million each. After legal fees and expenses, Marcus and Diane received about $900,000. It was more money than they'd ever had, but it felt hollow. "We didn't do this for money," Diane said, looking at the settlement check. "I know," Marcus replied, "but we can use it to do good." They donated a significant portion to children's hospitals and safety advocacy groups. They set up a scholarship in Sarah's name for students studying engineering. And they kept some for themselves, enough to retire comfortably, to travel, to enjoy the years they had left. But more than the money, the verdict changed things. Other families who'd lost loved ones in industrial accidents started coming forward, emboldened by the Hayes victory. Class action lawsuits were filed against Meridian for other incidents. The company's stock plummeted. Within 2 years, Meridian Industries filed for bankruptcy. Their assets sold off to pay settlements. James Whitmore faced federal charges for fraud and conspiracy. At 76, he was convicted and sentenced to 15 years in prison. More symbolic than practical at his age. But the message was clear. Corporate executives couldn't hide behind their companies anymore. Eleanor Hartley's story became a case study in engineering ethics programs. The Hartley Confession was taught in universities as an example of the cost of remaining silent, of the importance of speaking up even when it's difficult. Howard Hartley lived to see his wife vindicated. He died peacefully 2 years after the trial, and his obituary mentioned Eleanor's courage in collecting evidence and making sure the truth eventually came out. The storage facility where Marcus had made his discovery put up a plaque. Here began the exposure of the Apex Chemical cover-up, proving that truth, however long buried, will eventually surface. And the families found a kind of peace. Not closure. You don't get closure when you lose a child. But acknowledgement. Justice. The knowledge that their children's deaths hadn't been forgotten, hadn't been in vain, had led to changes that might save other lives. 5 years after finding the storage unit, Marcus and Diane stood at Sarah's grave on the anniversary of her death. She would have been 37 now. Might have had children of her own. Might have been an engineer or a scientist. She'd loved science so much. "We did it, baby girl," Marcus said softly. "We made sure everyone knows it wasn't your fault. It wasn't an accident. You didn't do anything wrong. They did." Diane placed fresh flowers on the grave. "And we made sure it won't happen to other kids. New safety laws, stricter oversight, criminal penalties for executives who ignore warnings." "You helped save lives, Sarah. Even after you were gone, you helped save lives." They stood in silence for a while, then walked back to their car. Other families were there too. It had become a tradition, gathering on the anniversary, supporting each other. Lisa Chen approached them, holding hands with her husband. The Wu twins' parents, still married after all these years, held together by shared grief and shared triumph. "Thank you," Lisa said to Marcus, "for finding that storage unit, for not just taking the contents and ignoring what it meant, for caring enough to fight." "I couldn't not fight," Marcus said. "Sarah deserved it. They all deserved it." As the families gathered for the memorial service, a tradition now, more celebration of lives than mourning of deaths, Marcus thought about the chain of events that had led here. A storage unit auctioned by mistake. A box of evidence hidden for 40 years. A woman's deathbed confession. One photograph of a smiling little girl. And from that, justice, change, hope. Eleanor Hartley had spent 40 years as a coward, consumed by guilt, unable to face what she knew. But in the end, she'd found courage. She'd made sure the truth survived her, made sure it would eventually reach people who'd care enough to act on it. "Do you think she's at peace now?" Diane asked, seeming to read his thoughts. "Eleanor?" Marcus looked at the gathering of families, at the memorial wreath bearing 23 names, at the reporters covering the annual ceremony, at the world that now knew the truth. "I think she is," he said. "I think they all are. Our kids, and the woman who tried to save them, and all the other children who live because of what came out. I think they're all at peace now." That night, Marcus had a dream, the first one in years that didn't end in nightmares. He dreamed of Sarah at 9 years old, wearing her purple jacket, standing in a field of flowers. She was smiling that gap-toothed smile, waving at him. "I'm proud of you, Daddy," she said. "You did good." He woke with tears on his face, but they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of relief. The burden he'd carried for 28 years, the unanswered questions, the senseless accident, the feeling that his daughter had died for nothing, was finally lifted. She hadn't died for nothing. Her death had exposed a conspiracy, brought down a corrupt company, sent criminals to prison, and changed laws that would protect countless others. It wasn't the legacy Marcus would have chosen. He'd rather have his daughter back, would trade everything, the money, the vindication, all of it, for one more day with Sarah. But that wasn't possible. So instead, he'd made sure her death meant something. And that would have to be enough. 10 years after finding the storage unit, Marcus received an unexpected letter. It was from a woman named Patricia Sanderson, and it began, "You don't know me, but my daughter is alive because of you." Marcus read on, confused. "My daughter Emily works at a chemical plant in Ohio. Last month, she noticed some pressure readings that seemed wrong on one of the storage tanks. She remembered the Apex chemical case, the Hartley memo, the ignored warnings, the children who died. She reported the issue to her supervisor, who dismissed her concerns. So she went over his head, and over his head again, all the way to the company president. They investigated. They found a critical failure in the pressure relief system, exactly like the one that caused the Apex explosion. If it hadn't been caught, if Emily had stayed silent like her supervisor wanted, there could have been another disaster. But Emily fought. She refused to be silenced. She said, "I'm not going to be another Eleanor Hartley. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life knowing I could have prevented something and didn't." The company is making the repairs. The plant was shut down temporarily. Some executives lost their jobs, and hundreds of workers, including my daughter, are alive because of it. I wanted you to know. I wanted you to know that your daughter's death and Eleanor Hartley's confession and your decision to fight, even when it was hard, all of that saved my Emily, saved so many others we'll never know about. Thank you. Thank you for not letting it stay buried. Thank you for caring. Thank you for fighting. Sarah's life had meaning. I hope that brings you some comfort. Marcus showed the letter to Diane. They cried together, overwhelmed by the ripples their actions had caused. How many Emily Sandersons were out there? How many workers who spoke up when they saw something wrong, emboldened by the knowledge that silence could be deadly? How many disasters were prevented because the Apex case had taught people that corporations couldn't be trusted to put safety over profit? They'd never know the full impact, but they knew it was real. Sarah's death and the deaths of 22 other children had changed the world in ways both measurable and invisible. New safety regulations, criminal liability for executives, a cultural shift toward whistleblower protection, thousands of engineering students learning about the Hartley confession and vowing not to repeat her mistakes, and people like Emily Sanderson refusing to stay silent, refusing to let history repeat. That was the legacy. Not just the lawsuit, not just the money, not just the prison sentences, but the lives saved, the disasters prevented, the children who would grow up because someone learned from the past and chose to act differently. Marcus framed Patricia Sanderson's letter and hung it in his study, next to the photograph of Sarah that had started everything. Sometimes, late at night, he would look at those two things, the picture of his daughter and the letter about the daughter who'd been saved, and he would feel something close to peace. Not happiness. The hole Sarah had left could never be filled. But purpose, meaning, the knowledge that terrible things could lead to positive change, that tragedy didn't have to be the end of the story. It could be the beginning of something better. Marcus Hayes died at the age of 71, 15 years after finding the storage unit. His obituary in the New York Times ran with the headline, "Marcus Hayes, who exposed Apex Chemical cover-up, dies at 71." The article chronicled his life, the loss of his daughter, the accidental discovery, the years-long legal battle, the changes his activism had brought about. But the ending focused on his legacy. In the years after the trial, Hayes became an advocate for corporate accountability and workplace safety. He testified before Congress on whistleblower protection. He advised other families seeking justice for industrial accidents. He never stopped fighting to make sure that what happened to his daughter wouldn't happen to others. "We can't bring Sarah back," he said in an interview last year, "but we can make sure her death wasn't meaningless. We can make sure other parents don't have to bury their children because a company decided profit was more important than people." Hayes is survived by his wife Diane, his son Thomas, 3 grandchildren, and the countless lives saved by the changes his courage set in motion. At the funeral, the church was packed. The other plaintiff families were there, of course, but so were people the Hayes family had never met. Safety regulators, engineers, parents whose children worked in chemical plants and came home safely every day because someone had learned from Apex. Rebecca Martinez gave a eulogy, her voice breaking with emotion. Marcus Hayes was an accidental hero. He didn't set out to change the world. He just bought a storage unit at an auction, looking for some antiques to resell. But when he found evidence of a terrible injustice, he didn't look away. He didn't decide it was too hard, too expensive, too risky to pursue. He did the right thing, even when it was difficult, even when he was threatened, even when people told him it was hopeless. And because of that choice, that simple, courageous choice to care, the world is better, safer, more just. That's the lesson of Marcus Hayes's life. Not that we need to be extraordinary, but that ordinary people, faced with extraordinary circumstances, can choose courage over comfort, can choose justice over convenience, can choose to act even when it's easier not to. Marcus and Diane gave me a gift when they walked into my office 15 years ago. They reminded me why I became a lawyer, to fight for people who can't fight for themselves, to speak truth to power, to believe that the system, for all its flaws, can still deliver justice. They didn't just win a case. They changed how we think about corporate responsibility. They saved lives we'll never be able to count. And they made sure their daughter's memory became a force for good in the world. That's a life well lived. That's a legacy worth celebrating. After the funeral, Diane stood in the cemetery, looking at Marcus's grave beside Sarah's. Father and daughter, together at last. "You did good, honey," she whispered. "I'm so proud of you. Sarah would be proud too." She placed flowers on both graves, purple ones for Sarah, her favorite color, and white ones for Marcus. As she turned to leave, she noticed a young woman standing nearby, holding a small child. "Mrs. Hayes?" The woman approached hesitantly. "I'm sorry to intrude. I wanted to say thank you." "Do I know you?" "No, but I read about your husband, about what he did. I'm an engineer at a manufacturing plant." 3 months ago, I noticed something that didn't seem right, a maintenance issue that was being ignored. I was scared to report it, scared of losing my job, of being labeled a troublemaker. The woman's eyes filled with tears, but I thought about your husband, about Sarah, about how silence can kill. So I reported it, and it turns out the issue was critical. It could have caused a major fire. They fixed it, and this morning I brought my son to work for Family Day, and he got to see the plant, and I knew he was safe because I'd spoken up. She looked down at her son, who was maybe 5 years old, then back at Diane. "Your husband saved my son. Maybe not directly, but the example he set, the courage he showed, that saved us. I wanted you to know that. I wanted to thank you." Diane hugged her, this stranger whose child was alive because of choices made years ago. "Sarah would be 42 now," Diane said. "She might have had children. I think about that sometimes, the grandchildren I never got to meet. But then I meet people like you, and I realize she does have a legacy. Not biological, but something better. She's kept other people's children safe." After the woman left, Diane stood for a long time between the two graves. She thought about the storage unit that had started it all, about Eleanor Hartley spending 40 years in guilty silence but finally finding the courage to confess, about Marcus opening a random box and choosing to care about what he found inside. She thought about the chain of choices that led from tragedy to justice to change. And she thought about all the Emily Sandersons and unnamed engineers out there, making the world safer one brave decision at a time. "It was worth it," she said to Marcus and Sarah. "The fight, the stress, all of it. It was worth it." The wind rustled through the cemetery trees, and for a moment, Diane could have sworn she heard her daughter's laughter. She smiled, wiped her eyes, and walked back to her car. She had work to do. The foundation Marcus had started needed attention. Congressional testimony next month on new safety legislation. A speaking engagement at an engineering school. The work was never done. But neither was hope. And as long as people kept choosing courage over comfort, kept choosing to speak up rather than stay silent, kept choosing to act on what they knew was right, Sarah's legacy would live on. Not in marble monuments or history books, but in the lives saved, in the disasters prevented, in the children who came home safely to their parents because someone, somewhere, had learned from the past and chosen to do better. That was the real memorial, and it would last forever.